With the release of the Murderbot TV series trailer yesterday, my thoughts immediately turned to the myriad of adaptations we've gotten, from movies to shows to anime, that have turned out to be not as stellar as those of us who were faithful lovers and enjoyers of the source material hoped for. Now, this is not to say that I'm expecting that the Murderbot adaptation would suck, mind you. From what we've gotten of the trailer, I am fully expecting that it would live up to the brilliance, acerbic wit of the original series, which is a great way for me to plug this in. If you love your robots with a sardonic wit and interest in TV shows, the more salacious, the better, with an absolute disdain for humanity, even as he eventually grows to appreciate and even protect the humans he quasi-adopts as his own, all the while referring to himself as Murderbot, then you absolutely should pick up the Murderbot Diary series by Martha Wells before the very first season kicks off come May 18th. Unsure where to start? Go to the very beginning. All Systems Red introduces us to Murderbot, sets the stakes, establishes the world, and brings us the realization that this is going to be a cracktastic, can't stop laughing, but also would squeeze your heart type story. I highly, highly recommend it. But back to my initial point, I am 90% sure that Apple TV will get the adaptation of Murderbot right. From the tone and the casting and even the character introductions that we got with the trailer, we've been teased with what I consider is a very good understanding of the source material and a crew that's definitely putting their best to see it come to life. However, there's still that 10% doubt that will not be fully assuaged until the first season drops and we're able to actually completely fully watch the show. And that 10% for me is because of the other adaptations of books, comics, mangas, games, etc. that we've gotten through the years. Now, I'm not going to lie and pretend that all adaptations we've received sucked. I disagree with that. Some have been okay, like the Shannara Chronicles. Some have been better than expected, for example, Good Omens and Sandman. Fuck Neil Gaiman though. Some had a great start and then devolved into an absolute colossal mess, for example, The Witcher. And some have been so bad that you find yourself wondering if they can even be called adaptations at this rate. For example, the absolute utter shite that is the waste of 90 minutes of my time that I will never get back, that is the Dark Tower movie. Why?
What was the reason? I just explained the reason. What was the reason?
So yeah, with the Murderbot show coming soon to our screens, I thought to explore the reasons why I personally believe a ton of adaptations suck, with the hope that none of this applies to Murderbot when we get it, so we can all enjoy what is surely going to be yet another knockout of the park for Apple TV. And before you ask, no, this isn't a sponsored video. Apple TV did not reach out to me to promote the show or anything, but hey, if anyone on Apple TV is watching this right now, call me maybe. Back to the main point of the video. In looking at the terrible, terrible adaptations that we've gotten so far, I've come to the realization that there are 5 major points that affect the suckability. Is that a word? Of adaptations, i.e., for most of us to conclude that an adaptation sucks, it can be blamed on these 5 points or reasons. Number 1, screenwriters wanting to put their stamp on things. See, I get it. Everyone has a story that they want to tell, and they want to pull it off so brilliantly that the entire world will be in awe of said brilliance. It's an ego thing. A lot of writers naturally are pretty egotistical about our work. We want the world to see that we have the spark, the wit to come up with compelling characters and stories that would have audiences in awe. But when you're a screenwriter whose job it is to write for the silver screen, things get a little complicated. This is especially so if you're meant to adapt for the silver screen work that has already been written by another writer. And there is that feeling that what you make would be compared with what the other writer had created, because of course fans want a word-for-word adaptation of the story that we've read on page. And that is where the ego trip comes in. Because like I said earlier, most writers would like for their work and their words and their characters to be loved, adored, and appreciated. And you don't get that with adaptations because the characters were already created by the writer who put together the source material. And so, what do some screenwriters choose to do? Easy. They put their own spin on it, put their own stamp on things. This can range from having things happen in the adaptation that never did in the source material, e.g., Yennefer losing her powers so that the story can explore what she would do and how her mantle will be tested if she's without the power that she sacrificed so much for, or creating utterly new characters all for the sake of having something of their own in the adaptation that they can point at as their own invention. For example, the Voleth Mere. Or it can be ascribing qualities that belong to one character to another so they can give said character depth, usually at the detriment of the character for whom they stripped some of these good points. For example, Colin Bridgerton, whose easy charm, the one that naturally draws people to him like flies, was instead given to Benedict. And that Benedict lack of purpose that the show spent seasons 2 and 3 showing us was something that Colin was meant to deal with. His charming laissez-faire way was meant to hide the fact that he felt his life lacked purpose. However, for the showrunners to give the feeling that show Benedict is different from book Benedict and show Colin is different from book Colin, they gave a ton of Colin's characteristics to his brother and left Colin with practically nothing but the barest bones, which in turn meant that a lot of people unfortunately found him quite boring as a result. But hey, at least they put their stamp on things. Am I right? Then there's point number 2. No respect for the source material. Now, I'm sure you all probably also saw the news and the theories from the implied meaning behind Henry Cavill's words and why he walked away from the role of Geralt of Rivia. The showrunners and some of the writers for Netflix's adaptation of The Witcher had zero respect for the source material. Hell, some of them didn't even like the book. Which is wild to me personally, because how on earth do you take on the decision to adapt a story for which you aren't a fan of it? Like, Andrzej Sapkowski, I'm sorry. That means you didn't spend days, weeks, months, even years analyzing the story, theorizing what it is about and where it could go, and why the writer made certain choices and what other choices could be considered that would still keep the theme and the plot and the heart of the story intact. It takes a lot of work to adapt a story, whether it be a book or a comic or a video game or a manga. All of it takes work. And when you go out of your way to be blatantly disrespectful to the work your show or movie is based off of, fans can tell. It bleeds through, we all know. For example, I don't think there is anybody, absolutely anybody on this God-given earth that watched the atrocity, the train wreck, the absolute crash and garbage that was the adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Yes, I am referring to the M. Night Shyamalan one. There is no one who saw that and thought, you know what? Maybe the people who made this movie, really loved Avatar: The Last Airbender. Because I remember when I finished that movie and walked out of the cinema, I had 2 thoughts. 1, that is money flushed down the toilet that I would never get back. 2, whoever thought that this shite adaptation was a good representation of Avatar: The Last Airbender, whoever wrote the script and thought they captured the essence of what the original animation was and the story it wanted to tell, must have lost their damn minds, because what in the bullshit did I just spend almost 2 hours on? It's been 15 years, and I'm still miffed at the utter disrespect that is that movie. And yes, every time I get the chance to talk adaptations, I am going to bring up the elephant in the room. The 8th season of Game of Thrones. Because I know at this point, everybody is aware that we got such a rushed, disrespectful ending to the show because D&D wanted to move on to Star Wars and that Disney money and just half-assed and cocked the entirety of everyone's storyline, the narrative structure, the character arcs and growth that these characters were meant to experience. Everything was sacrificed for the sake of profit and because they wanted to move on to something else. Which, just that thought makes me scream the disrespect every day and every damn time I think about it. If you're someone who's read A Song of Ice and Fire, you are aware of the intricacies of the plot, the themes it focuses on, like the absolute power of the monarchy, the loss of freedoms and identities, and the sufferings of the masses and serfs under feudalism, the eye tolls of wars, and how they tear the entire country apart, not just amongst the warring groups, but also within the family unit, and ultimately the commentary on global warming, the end of the world, and the sacrifice that needs to be offered in order to maintain the balance of ice and fire and the preservation of the world. Everything that makes the story compelling and complicated and layered, flushed down the toilet by showrunners who had zero respect for what the story was and could not be bothered to see it through to its completion. If David Benoff and DB Weiss have 1 million haters left, best believe I'm one of that number. If they have 1,000 haters left, I am still there. If they have only one hater remaining, then you can be certain that the hater is me. And if they have no haters left, please know that it means I'm dead. But not to worry, I am still cursing their asses and spitting on their names in the afterlife. Absolute trash. Number 3 reason why some adaptations suck comes down to the studios. Because no, we don't only have to blame the showrunners or the writers. Studios and their greedy corporate interests that have them wanting to reap all the benefits even as they screw over the adaptations also have their role to play in the mess. Case in point, my dearest viewers, might I introduce you to the clusterfuck of an adaptation that is The Hobbit. Now, before you bring out the pitchforks, please hear me out. I am a Lord of the Rings girly. Whether it be Tolkien or the Peter Jackson adaptation of the trilogy, I love it. It's my bread and butter, my honey bun sugar plump, pumpy umpy upkin. That's my sweetie pie. I have been in love and obsessed since the first time I watched it, weeks after LOTR released back in 2001. Legolas was my childhood crush for years, and I was ready to risk it all for Arwen. Aragorn would always be my king. I am a Lord of the Rings girly for life. So imagine my absolute delight back in 2012 when The Hobbit came out in cinemas. I was ready. I was prepared. I was sat. And then I was in shock when I got to the end and realized that there was going to be The Desolation of Smaug, a second movie, and then a year after that, a third. At which point I was exhausted and numb. I still showed up because, hey, it's Tolkien. But I was pissed as hell. I was infuriated and tired in equal measure because The Hobbit is a max 300 pages book. 300 pages of sheer adventure, but 300 pages nonetheless. But because the pieces of shit that is Warner Brothers wanted to make a boatload of money based off of what happened with the original trilogy, ignore the fact that the Lord of the Rings book was split into 3 volumes. And what the original trilogy did was adapt said volumes in order. Peter Jackson respected the source material and clearly loved it, which is why the OG is always a fave in my house and I rewatch it every bloody year like clockwork. The Hobbit, however, is a 300-page book that because of profits, because the studio wanted to make the same money that they did with The Lord of the Rings, proceeded to stretch into 3 bloody films that left everybody following it exhausted by the end. That was a dismal, abysmal, absolutely shite adaptation of Tolkien's work. And I just feel my heart breaking for Peter Jackson because you absolutely know that unfortunately his hands were tied in that regard. Because I'm sure if it was up to him, it wouldn't make that mess. That was all the fault of corporate greed. And honestly, it's the same thing that happened with Twilight's Breaking Dawn, which was meant to be the 4th book in the series and the end of the saga. Because of how popular Twilight was and because Lionsgate did not want to let go of their golden goose so soon, they milked that last book for all it was worth, splitting it into 2 in a way that made 0 sense and was clearly all about making as much money as they could from the adaptation, which... And the same thing happened with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, being split into 2, all because Warner Bros. Wanted to make more money. And please, don't tell me the bullshit about, oh, it's because the book is so long, blah, blah, blah. They already massacred Order of the Phoenix, which was the longest book in the series, by forcing it into 1 movie. They could have done the same for Deathly Hallows as well. They didn't because money. Side note, fuck J.K. Turflin always. Just putting it out there. Thank you. Now, for the fourth reason why certain adaptations suck, no respect for the audience's intelligence. Look no further than the absolute shite, the complete garbage, the waste of space, waste of my time, and waste of Michael Fassbender's time and talent. Yes, I am referring to the movie adaptation of Assassin's Creed. Now, are there people who enjoyed it and loved it? I'm sure they are. In my house, however, me and my homies, we detest it. We loathe it. We are still looking for all the words that can comfortably convey how much we despised the adaptation for only one reason and one reason only. It's a movie that seems to have convinced itself that the reason why we love the Assassin's Creed games is because of the action, the fights, the parkour, and honestly, I'm not going to blame them. There are some players who are only about that. But Assassin's Creed fans are fans of the story, the lore as well. It's why the RPG turn makes a lot of us frustrated because we wish Assassin's Creed could go back to its roots. Remember the story it was telling and the compelling difference of dogma, belief, and orthodoxy that drives the Templars' Brotherhood conflict within the game. Oh, yes. And to save the world, of course. The problem with the adaptation of the Assassin's Creed movie is the belief that those of us who enjoyed the game are stupid. That all we will see is, look, parkour, and we would be happy with that. And I'm just over here watching that movie, constantly asking myself, what is the story? What is the point? What is this? Yes, y'all. I'm still bitter that that's the adaptation we got. If you enjoyed it though, good for you. At least you didn't feel that your time was wasted. Me and my homies, however, we despise it. And finally, the fifth reason why some adaptations suck. Changing the format best suited for the story just because. And I personally don't think there's another adaptation as guilty of this, like the utter bullshit that was The Dark Tower. Now, my bestie is a Stephen King lover. I am not. Because for the longest time, I was convinced that I am a scaredy cat and Stephen King writes the type of psychological horror that would have my brain spinning non-stop, so I never really read Stephen King. The Dark Tower series, however, I read, I loved, and I absolutely obsessed about it because it's a mismatch of so many genres and I'm a fan of gunslingers, so clearly Ronald was Bay. Plus, it linked a lot of his worlds together and was what got me to start tentatively reading other Stephen King books. So when the news dropped that we were getting an adaptation, I was through the roof. I was so excited, already figured out how the episodic format would work well on screen and let us fully enjoy the Western meets slightly apocalyptic world that the book situates itself within, because the world is ending and Ronald is our beacon, our focus, the only ray of hope left. I was intrigued. When the news dropped that it was going to be a movie adaptation, I paused slightly. It's an 8-book series with a novella interspaced within it. But most importantly, if you read Stephen King, then you know that his stories are pretty dense. And it's because a lot of his completed works are dense that it had me wondering why on earth anyone would think making a film adaptation of the Dark Tower series would work. Like, it didn't work for other book series. And before you mention Harry Potter, please remember that The Philosopher's Stone was a pretty small book. The series started small and then starts to build by the time we reach Goblet of Fire, which is where the adaptation started to go downhill. Because to make it fit a film format, you have to cut a lot of the bits that give structure to the world and the story and the characters and their motivations. Harry Potter was a study in what not to do when you have a book series with 7 books and think a film adaptation is the right choice for it. The Dark Tower had 8 books. And unlike Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, it didn't have a small, cute start to the story. Which meant that what we got was an adaptation that was chopped and compressed into a mess that audiences could not understand and fans did not and could not tolerate. An absolute colossal mess. It's why I am relieved that we're getting a series adaptation instead for Murderbot. And I'm eagerly awaiting the airing of the first episode. I hope that they get it right. And I hope at no point that any of the things I mentioned find their way into the writer's room, because should that happen, then that's an adaptation that is about to suck. But hey, that's just my thoughts. What about yours? Like this video if you watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share it if you want to. Subscribe if you're interested. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until Monday's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.